I'm Mr. Black, this is Beyond Creepy, and in this video I'm going to be discussing two entity cases that I found really interesting. Did a newspaper carrier encounter an alien in a Detroit alley in 1961? In the March 5, 1967 issue of the Detroit Free Press, there was a curious account involving a young boy who claims he encountered a strange being. It happened one Sunday morning in 1961. The boy, who had just finished delivering his newspapers, was riding his bike through an alleyway near his home. It was quite early, and he noted that the streets were deserted. He caught sight of a strange figure standing in the middle of the alley behind a garage. "I stopped my bike. I couldn't move," he told the newspaper, which did not reveal his name. He claimed that the figure simply stood there. It was about 4 feet tall, and its head was bald and, quote, light bulb shaped. It wore a long black gown that touched the ground. 2 antennae jutted from its back, though the witness supposed that it could have been aerials coming from a backpack radio. Its hands were outstretched, and its face was turned towards the heavens. The witness got the sense that it was waiting for something. When I recovered from the shock, I withdrew to Livernois Avenue, where I rubbed my eyes and pinched myself to make sure I was not dreaming. I then proceeded back into the alley to take another look. The being was still there. When I tell someone about this, they just laugh at me. But I would like to tell you that what I saw was not just a figment of my imagination, and I will believe what I saw the rest of my life. So, what did he see? It should be noted that it was 6 years between the date of the sighting and the date in which the story was published in the Detroit Free Press. It's entirely possible that the witness, identified in the article as a former newspaper carrier, added some details. Granted, it's also entirely possible that he forgot some details too. I found it interesting that he described it as a light bulb-shaped, bald-headed being dressed in a black gown. His account was published in 1967, a decade before Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind popularized the idea of bald-headed beings with light bulb-shaped heads. Was it just a coincidence that he would describe what a typical gray being looked like before such a thing was common knowledge? Also, he noted that the being was looking skyward, as if waiting for something. I wonder what might have happened had he chosen to linger around the area a little longer to see what that something was. While heading into work, 2 men encounter a strange, green-eyed being that leaves them terrified. It was January 1970, Amshar Ridge, Chelyabinsk Province, Russia. 2 local tractor drivers were driving their brand new Caterpillar tractor DT75, heading to the village to start their day of work. It was quite chilly that early morning, and the moon was shining bright in the sky. As they passed some railroad tracks, they suddenly heard a distinct voice above their tractor engine. The voice said, "Guys, I need a lift." It surprised them, and they immediately stopped and got out to find out where the voice had come from. A few meters ahead of them, on the right side of the road, they spotted what looked to them like, quote, an old woman. Strangely, she was not dressed for the season. Despite it being nearly 30 degrees below, she was wearing only a flimsy white dress that covered her completely down to her feet. She was completely bald, and her eyes, strangely, appeared to be glowing bright green. Before the men could understand what they were seeing, the strange entity moved towards their tractor. They noted that her movements seemed odd. She did not walk like a normal person. Instead, she seemed to float over the snow-covered road. In the lights of the tractor, they could see that behind her there were no tracks or footprints in the snow, seemingly confirming that this woman somehow, was floating. How was it even possible? She grabbed the tractor's door handle, and at that moment, all the lights on the tractor, including the headlights, suddenly went out. The engine continued to function properly, though, and they were able to drive. They estimated that they were moving at only about 6 miles per hour. The old woman managed to pry the door open and look inside the cab. When she tried to get inside, the men became overwhelmed with fear. The driver grasped the door handle with both hands in an attempt to prevent her from entering, but he could not close the door. His passenger began to help him, but together they still could not close it. Only when the passenger inserted the mount into the handle of the door and used it as a lever did they manage to close and lock the door of the cab. The woman continued to wrench on the door handle in a desperate bid to get inside. As this was going on, they noted that she seemed to be floating above the road alongside them. She continued to stare at the men with her glowing green eyes unblinking, her face pressed close to the side of the window of the cab, only centimeters away from the terrified men. Her head and shoulders were visible, and her arms and shoulder were naked. Her skin color was very dark, and they noted that she seemed to have a long, hook-like nose protruding from her face. They continued to drive for about 1 kilometer. As they approached a right-hand turn in the road, the distracted driver nearly missed the turn. When he and the passenger turned their attention back to the floating woman, she was now gone. At that moment, the lights in the tractor came back on, and the frightened men continued into the village. Albert Rosales made me aware of this case, which appeared in the files of Alexei Prima. He is the author of the 1999 book, Chronicles of the Unexplained. Thanks to Albert for translating it. What I found interesting is how much it reminded me of the January 16, 2004 case in which Monterey police officer Leonardo Simango claims he encountered a, quote, witch, who violently attacked his cruiser and tried to get inside. She too seemed to have the ability to float and appeared almost animal-like. Though Simango described his entity as having black eyes and dressed in a black gown, while the one in Chelyabinsk was described as having green eyes and was dressed in a white gown. I do not know if there is a connection between the two cases, but I did find it interesting nonetheless.